Thank you, Jim. I am excited about this meeting tonight. I've been going to plays for many, many years in Seattle, and anyone who attends theater here, one thing that I think always stands out is the quality, not just of the acting in the plays, but also the background, that story that's behind it that helps us connect to what the playwright is trying to do. And the people who help that are the people in front of you tonight who are going to be our panelists, and they are going to be talking about, I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about. Sara Keats is going to be the moderator. She is a freelance dramaturg, and I'm just going to turn it over to Sara because you don't want to hear me. Thank you. Sara, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and thanks. And I just want to start by saying, David, thanks so much for reaching out. We, in this profession, talk to each other a lot, talk to other theater professionals a lot. But I at least haven't done a lot of panels like this where I get to talk to people with overlapping but not the same exact interests. So really eager to hear questions from attendees tonight. And I'll try to work them into our conversation as we go. So just to start by way of introduction, my name is Sara Keats. I use she and her pronouns. And I'm a freelance dramaturg working mostly on new plays around Seattle. And now I would be thrilled to introduce some of our panelists. Erin, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Bednarz, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am a theater artist and maker. I work as a dramaturg, and I also work as a sound designer with very dramaturgically minded values, which we'll get into later. But yeah, I feel like right now I'm doing a little bit more active dramaturgy as well. So I'm really excited to be on this panel tonight to sort of like have a mind meld of how to be doing dramaturgy specifically, but also how it sort of filters into everything that I do as a theater maker. So thanks for having me.
Paul, why don't you go next? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on right now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Paul Adolphsen. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a dramaturg living in Seattle. I currently serve as the literary manager and dramaturg at Seattle Rep, which is a large professional nonprofit theater that's located in Seattle Center. And has been around and part of the regional theater movement and has been around for 60 years. I've been working there for just 2. And before that, I was doing dramaturgy work and working in an institutional context in a bunch of different places around the country, including Washington, D.C., Sarasota, Florida, and Ashland, Oregon. And right now I am, we just announced our season at the Rep, so I am full steam ahead with some projects there. Most notably, we are producing Thornton Wilder's Skin of Our Teeth. So I am working very closely with the director on that project.
Amazing. Great. Sara, why don't you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sara Freeman. I'm a professor of theater arts at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. Longtime dramaturg, director and scholar as well. Mostly I teach theater history and dramatic literature classes, but I also teach fundamentals of acting at Puget Sound, which is a BA liberal arts theater program that's deeply, deeply grounded in dramaturgy. I would say that we understand dramaturgy as the basis of everything that theater artists do, and that all theater artists and many other people need dramaturgy and need to do dramaturgy. I most recently directed a production of Measure for Measure here on our season, and I'm the incoming president of the professional organization Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas, LMDA. So there's a fair pitch going on here to reclaim Erin and Paul and Sara really, and like as much as we can for more LMDA activities. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. And Gavin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Gavin Reub. I am a dramaturg, director, producer. I'm the artistic director and company dramaturg for the Seagull Project, which is a company that focuses primarily on the works of Anton Chekhov. We spent about 2 years working on a play, so it's a big deep dive experience. So a lot of background in Russian literature and Russian performance. And I am also a new works dramaturg. I leave in just a couple of days to go down to the Pacific Performance Festival at South Coast Rep to work on a new play down there. And I'm super excited to be here and to chat with everybody.
Okay, great. Thanks y'all. I forgot to say this before I had folks do introductions, but questions are welcome in the chat as we go. Feel free. Oh no, I did say that. Okay, sorry. Folks who didn't join early missed that I'm on the East Coast. So if I start to look sleepy, please don't read into it too much. Anyway, I think let's start with a really basic question. We talked about already, like, dramaturgy as a foundation, as a practice. Obviously, it's a profession that all of us are engaged in various degrees. And so, and I suspect that it parallels the study of history in that way, right? Like, we might define what it means to be a historian in lots of different ways, depending on the context. So I'd love for us to start with panelists. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you define dramaturgy, how you define the role of a dramaturg, both in the theatrical process and maybe in the context of scholarship or otherwise. And attendees, you'll hear there'll probably be some divergence in these answers because we all practice it a little bit differently. So yeah, who'd like to kick us off? Or I can call on someone. Yeah. Sarah, what do you think? When you've got a freshman walking in and who says, okay, I signed up for dramaturgy, but I don't even know how to say it or what it is, what do you say?
Oh, well, I say, because I'm a professor, I say, well, the word dramaturgy has these roots in it, drama, right? Action, urgy always means the working of, like metallurgy is the working of metal. Dramaturgy is the working of the actions. So it is both analytical and creative practices required to do storytelling in action, done by all theater artists. But when you are the dramaturg in a production team, you are part of the artistic staff and you work across all of the areas on conceptual and storytelling framing. And then you also do that work outward towards the audience. And if you are the dramaturg for an organization, you're doing the same thing at a sort of systematic level. So.
I love that
Sarah
answer.
stole my answer, so yeah. No, that was perfect. That was great.
So wonderful.
You'd think I've been teaching for 30
right.
years.
I always dread this question, so that's why I was being quiet, because I'm always like, oh, I'm just gonna bore everyone the minute that I open my mouth. But I guess everyone came here to hear about dramaturgy, so you know.
Yes. I love that as a foundational definition. I love it because I think it's great for us to start from the place of understanding how comprehensive this practice can be and how necessarily collaborative this practice can be in all its different ways of being. Just to get a little bit more tactical for a second, for folks who are completely new to this as a practice, what are some of the habits of dramaturgy in the way that each of you practice it? What are some of the things that you're actually doing in the day-to-day when you are a dramaturg on a production, say?
I do think this is maybe sideswiping your question, but I do think that to relate it to other disciplines or like metaphors is sometimes I find myself saying that we're similar to like a book editor, like a literary book editor, and the fact that like oftentimes you hear the term like book doctor or like someone who's like really in the trenches with an author and is helping them get from like the promise of their book being published, actually getting it out there, like through the door to the people who read it. And another metaphor, which I think we can all take or leave, is like a play doula, like someone who is there to like foster the creation and the validation and the possibility of someone, especially when it's a new play and they're like really building the world for the first time. Which again, I don't think answers your question, but is a little bit more of like simile thought cloud of dramaturgy.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Other famous metaphors are Talmudic scholar, the person who sits to the left of or the who whispers into the director's left ear, and there's a lot of thinking about the imagery we use to talk about what we do. But things that I do or have done, you might make a glossary for the production. You might do a whole treatment of the script. You might be the adapter of the script. You might do the cut of a script, which is not quite the same as an adaptation, depending on who you're collaborating with or how. You might have advocated to bring a new playwright or a play or a playwright to a production, and then sort of be there, being their best supporter during the process. You might make image files. You might put together actor packets. You might write articles for things that go outward facing. So just a beginning list.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of like what you did, that list, Sarah, that you just shared, like it is also, I think, commonplace for people to locate like questioning and asking questions at the heart of what a lot of dramaturgs do, because you are that person who's moving between different parts of a production that have slightly more specific focus, right? Like your designers are looking at their particular discipline and how it affects the whole. A director is like working with actors, and this is, I'm being very simplistic here, but I think that the kind of fluidity of the dramaturg in a process allows you to be the one who is kind of always asking questions to try to hone what collectively we're wanting to achieve. And sometimes that can be like, what are the things that we all need to know in order to make this play excellent? It's like, I worked on a production where the actor had to stitch someone on stage, and like, I went down that rabbit hole, and like we figured out together how he like physically was going to, to render the stitching on stage of this person so that he felt comfortable, and that it was also part of the action of the scene, right? Like caring for this person. So it's like that informational level asking questions, like how do you stitch a person? And then also the larger or the deeper emotional story-based questions of, why is he stitching this person? How, with what quality is he, caring for this other character? I have joked that if I ever like start an LLC or like create my own business as a dramaturg, it would be Stupid Questions LLC, because I don't think there are any stupid questions, but I think there's actually quite a lot of power in asking the kind of obvious question that everyone kind of assumed everyone else had asked, because you kind of get that way when you're working together, right? So for me, a lot of it is about, I think when I'm doing my best work, it's being led by asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one thing that we may talk more about later is there's a lot of times there's two large different phases in terms of like working on a production. There's production dramaturgs who are, as Sarah said, kind of to the left of the director, whispering in the ear of the director, usually have a big fat stack of books in front of them. If you're working on something that comes from a different language, maybe many, many different translations and adaptations, different interpretations, as well as a basically book that you have put together that is a dramaturgical packet that has been shared with folks, that is full of pertinent research points. And you're the kind of there next to the director, having these conversations, maybe talking with actors, and really just trying to fill the world with those questions and research as much as possible. And then kind of a new work dramaturg, which tends to be on the left side of the playwright instead of the director.
Right.
And that's it often feels very different. It sometimes can be very structural, talking about how the scenes are working together, or questioning what they're really trying to get at with this monologue that they've put in. And sometimes that, in a dramaturg who works on new work, can go all over the place. You might be helping to create whole entire scenes or segments. You might be working with communities to generate material. It can look a lot of different ways, but I think a nice distinction is the ear that you're whispering in on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's a really helpful distinction. I wonder now if we could talk a little bit about embedded within those activities. or maybe beyond them. You know, it's a limited example list. Where are the moments that we run into history? Whatever that may mean, theater history, different kinds of research, the living history of the people in our communities, etc. Maybe we could give some specific examples about what's a theater project where you spend time with history, and what did that look like?
Yeah, sometimes I think we're sort of like the fact checker of our other collaborators' artistic ideas and visions. Like, I think an example is like, if a scenic designer or a director is like, hey, like, I really want like specific like magazine coupon cutouts on the refrigerator in this home from the 1960s, then like that to me is like such a fun ask to be like, okay, like they just want it to happen and they want it to make sense. And then like I get to spend hours like Paul said, like going down a rabbit hole and making sure that like that coupon cutout is like not from the 50s and not from the 70s, and like based on if the play is taking place in like a metropolitan area of Chicago or a suburban area outside of Chicago, you know, how much money does this family who owns this fridge make? Where would they be shopping? Like, you really just get to nerd out, for lack of a better word, about like really making sure that somebody's artistic instinct is also going to be like incredibly validated and like fly. And that's also when I think a great way to, like, what I hope all of you do when you go see plays now after hearing us is like look for those things. Or like if you hear a song playing on the radio or you see, you know, something that seems overly specific, I hope you think like, oh, I bet they had a really good dramaturg on this play. Because I think like so often we don't care about getting the recognition. We care about getting the opportunity to spend hours looking at coupons, if we're taking my metaphor all the way. But that's at least what I do. I always am like, yay, dramaturg, when I see something that's like hyper specific and right on.
Well, and just to build on that, that's not only that it's not only of a service to the audience's experience of the production, but it changes the nature of the collaboration among the whole creative team, and especially with the actors. You know, I worked on an 18th century restoration comedy once where we did a whole workshop where I was just like, well, here's the photocopies from the etiquette book. Let's learn etiquette. And even if there's no one in the audience who knows that information and can fact check it, there's something about helping the actors get to an embodied experience of a period that I think just brings can bring a groundedness or an authenticity to a piece. And I do think, and I'll just throw this out there as a nugget for panelists to talk about maybe later in the conversation, but we work on a lot more than just period pieces. And often when we're doing, when we're working on a play that's telling a story that is set in a specific period, it's not essential that we get everything 100% right, but rather we can be selective. And when I say we, I mean the whole production team is putting it together, about the details that serve the story we're trying to tell. A play set in Norway does not always need to be in Norwegian, like if it's being presented to English-speaking audiences. And being thoughtful about which of those details to dial in and which of those details to kind of play with, right, is a part of the creative process, and is, I think, just one of the many creative aspects of this work.
I would say dramaturgs have done a lot of work to dispel the idea that their job is only literary, although literary managers and the idea of literature and the text matters a great deal, right? But it's not the only part. And they've also done a lot of work to dispel the idea that they are the history police, that they are the people who are there to sit in the room and say, no, or only this way. They want that we are part of the creative team, that it's about creative choices. But I see the questions about choices, not just specific tasks, but working with shows that interpret history or documentary presentations. And Oh, I just started going down so many rabbit holes. I'm just going to tell two things because also David's question about how much we reach out to other historians when doing research. So, for instance, I'm thinking about a show that I worked on where the show was about the Streeterville neighborhood in Chicago, and this was when I was living in Chicago. I was working with Timeline Theater, and they are a particularly timeline. Their mission is quite. They interpret it quite broadly, but they're always like, we're presenting things that engage with history or that are about times in history, which is everything actually, because every show is set somewhere in a specific place and time, or should, it was written for it. But this was a new play written by two Chicago actors who were becoming playwrights, and they'd done a bunch of research about Cap Streeter, who was a Civil War veteran who claimed this land right on the shoreline of Lake Michigan as his Civil War allotment, and he ran up against all of this complication because he was essentially supporting the building in of sand and building up of the shoreline to create his acreage. And then, of course, it's now where the Gold Coast is and like where some of the richest parts of Chicago are. And they'd done a bunch of research, right? And they handed over their research. But then we, the dramaturgs, really had to, we went to the Chicago Historical Society and we spent a lot of time working with the images that still exist and the images of Cap Streeter and Ma Streeter and people of the time and the political figures that are mentioned and that he fought with, and looking at the newspaper articles and thinking about the choices that Ralph and Riley had made, the playwrights, right? And then thinking about how to set up a lobby display because Timeline was blessed with this lobby where we did these quite elaborate lobby displays that allowed audiences to think dimensionally, like, oh, I saw this narrative and I maybe even know the city very well. Many of them did. And so I have a lived experience of this city. And then also what are all these dimensions that I might still think about historically, right? Because the play has to hold together and be an aesthetic experience, but then you can also, before and after, think about all the other ways around that aesthetic experience. And then I'll just say, how much do I reach out to other historians? I'm blessed to be on a college campus. So part of what I do is every show I do, I think, who's my colleague on campus who works on this area in any way? And I bring them in. So I did a Spanish Golden Age show 6 or 7 years ago, maybe it's 8 years ago. The pandemic has really messed up my ability to place things in time. Spanish Golden Age play, and we happened to have, before he retired, we had a great Spanish Golden Age scholar. He specialized in writing about the comedias of the Spanish Golden Age, and he knew this show, and he had published an article about it. And it's one of those great, early modern shows where the main characters take on disguises in the other gender, and so there's a lot of cross-dressing. And he writes in particular about queerness in the early modern era, and we just brought him in, right, to do 2 sessions with the cast, and then we did a whole sort of workshop where we moved it on its feet, where we thought about what does it mean to dress up in the clothings of the opposite gender in a period that has very strong rules about what those are. That's enough. You have to hear from everyone else.
I will say, when you were sharing, but when both of you were sharing it, I just wrote down on my page imagination because I think the best kind of historical research that can fuel a production, whether it's a new play that's never been produced before, or it's a play from the Spanish Golden Age, it's the best research that you can bring into the room is something that is going to ignite the imagination and the artistry of everyone in the room, and especially with actors. Maybe I'm whispering into the ear of the director or the playwright a lot, but I find myself working a lot with actors because they're the people who the story has to live in and through. And the more specific they can get about the world and what they're doing, generally, that is going to be most helpful for them to do their work. So it's about that detail, and it's about that the hunt for that particular detail that will unlock something or open something up, or will explain a part of the story that maybe we've all collectively been a little unsure about, or will just lead the actor to make a more idiosyncratic and particular and interesting choice, so I just kind of highlighting that it's kind of using that skills of research and of collecting like primary source documents and coupons, and then using that and kind of the alchemy of theater to then actually have that as a jumping off point for like an artistic idea. If that,
I was thinking about that, how like I believe actors are like bravely signing up to embody worlds that do not exist in the real time in which audiences are coming to view them, and to like bravely step into a different version of reality, which is what I think a play is like really gutsy. And I think sometimes like a great dramaturg can like fill their toolkit, right? Or like armor them up, or like fill their provision backpack of like, you might need this on your way into embodying this. And like, I know that you've already signed up to do a great job, but also maybe if you thought about this other thing on the left field, it might make your journey like that much more authentic, or like that much more fun. And they don't have, they can take it or leave it, but
yes.
then like Paul's saying, like when you ignite something in someone, then you just feel that much prouder that you like, you know, spent all those hours looking for coupons, which is the metaphor I'm going to carry the rest of this chat.
Yeah. I want to highlight one question that Susan put in the chat. This is your 10 or 723 question, and Susan, she writes, what are your experiences working with a subject that interprets history or a documentary presentation? Thinking of a bunch of like living newspaper stuff I had to do in college. What have been the particular challenges? And maybe in retrospect, are there ways that the play could have addressed them differently? And to me, this feels different but adjacent to adaptation too. Like when we start with an adaptive work, or we start with a work and we're adapting it, where are we faithful or unfaithful, and what does that mean in the adaptation context? So yeah, any panelists have experience, whether it's interpretation of real events or other works, and what are some of the challenges embedded in that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that about adaptation. And I'm also going to then liken it to translation, right? And translation and adaptation are not the same, but they're in dialogue with each other, and their theory is in dialogue with each other. And I think about the way that translation theory talks about the way that you can be foreignizing or domesticating, and then there's been changes in that sort of language a little bit too, as you translate, as you move from a source language to a target language. You can be working as a translator to create a sense of moving this thing that comes from elsewhere, another source, into a target culture so that it feels more familiar to the target culture, right? Or you can be working to move it over towards that target culture so that it feels quite strange still to them, right? Even as it may be in their language. And I would love to know what Gavin is thinking about as I say that. But I think that history work is that history is like that too in theater, which is, when is the project attempting to work with the historical sources or the historicity of the play and move it in a way that audiences feel like they're being invited to make parallels with it and like make common cause with it, or sort of be like, oh yes, I recognize that, even if it was a long time ago, we still do things like that, or that informs what we do. And when are they being invited to be like, what? Wow, right? Like people, and there's a little bit of Brecht in there versus now, which is like, am I having the reaction of what there was ever a society that worked this way, or like, how does my society work? Or am I having the reaction of like, oh yes, this is how my society works, fascinating, right? Like, how interesting that this is how societies work, right? And I've done both, and sometimes I think that what lights people on fire the most is sort of making it connect to them, as opposed to like making it feel strange to them. But I by temperament sort of a Brechtian, and that I like the idea of making things strange. So I feel like I've had some productions where I have been either as a director, but I'm sort of a dramaturgical director, or as the dramaturg supporting, like we've gotten somewhere with that sort of sense of productive like displacement. So
yeah, I think that's such a Great answer, Sarah. I think as someone who works on a lot of 19th century and early 20th century plays, I often look at them as like, there's an initial choice to be made, both as a director, as an artistic director, as a dramaturg, which is like, is this a piece that we are intending to have be a museum piece, you know, to be something where it's like, I want to show this as it is. I want to bring the history into the laps of the people who are engaging with it. Or is it something that you want to be like, oh no, we're going to engage with this through our contemporary lenses. We're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to adjust, whether it's concept or adaptation or otherwise, to kind of make those ends meet. And I just closed a couple months ago a production of Maxim Gorky's The Lower Depths, which I directed and I co-adapted, and we chose the latter. And for a lot of reasons, partially because you know, when you're looking back through the like the sinews of history, the further you go back, the more alien it can get, especially in certain tumultuous periods of history. Lower Depths was written in 1902. It is a play that takes place during a monarchy, that is hinting at a revolution, that is talking about a form of a class that we would probably call unhoused, that isn't really unhoused at the time, and it's dealing with Russian philosophy that we don't even have literal language for. Like, Gorky was making up words in this play that we don't have language for. And so at that point, you want to be like, okay, well, then we are going to do what we can to interpret this article as best as possible for a contemporary audience. And we met that on two sides. One side was that we were going to set it in a more contemporary vein with more contemporary language, which meant full adaptation. But the other side was that we were going to work with a native Russian speaker and the Russian community straight from who grew up learning and engaging with this to make a kind of a non-poetic, literal adaptation that we would then adapt ours on top of and in collaboration with. And so that was a really interesting process of engaging with history, engaging with politics, engaging with culture, and talking about how you can adjust some of those to bring in a contemporary Seattle audience to witness it and feel like they're watching a play that was written in 1902, but also feel like they can see it through a lens that is translatable to them today. And I think not every play needs to be that, but I think there are certain plays that you look back at and certain experiences or certain documentary or real literal artifacts that just don't translate. And so we have to adapt. And I agree, Sarah, that the lines between translate and adaptation, I lost a board member once for this conversation, I swear to God, because translation, if you're changing language, there's a reason why we have so many different translations of the work of Anton Chekhov, right? Is because like nobody can really fully agree on what he was intending, and the man's been dead for a long time, so it's tough to really get through that, figure that out. So but I think it's our job. I think in a lot of ways, dramaturgs and artists working in theater, working in film, we kind of tend the fire of these conversations, throughout history, and we keep it burning because we keep looking back, we keep reading, we keep these conversations, we talk to our colleagues, we invite them to the fire, and they'll bring their coupons or whatever, and we'll and we just can try and be like, but what was it? And we keep asking those questions, and then we see how we have that conversation around the fire today.
And I wonder too, Paul, like with your skin of our teeth example too, like what do you do you feel like you're going to be doing that type of work, like with skin of our teeth, in like understanding where it came from and when it was written, and like what the production plans to do, both from a dramaturgical perspective, and also as a literary manager who, like, when you program it, like, do you have that conversation of like, are we doing this knowing that we're gonna be, falling forward and calling back? Or, I wonder what your brain is doing with that question.
Yeah. I think that it's a great, thank you for that question. It's a great example of this kind of dynamic that we're talking about, because it's a play that was written in 1941 and then won the Pulitzer in 42, I believe, and in some ways reads like a play that was written today. I think there's a lot of contemporary playwrights who I read their plays and I'm like, oh, you think you're clever because you came up with this. Actually, Thornton Wilder came up with it, and I'm sure there's someone before Thornton Wilder who came up with it, because that's also part of our art. Is there's so many there are layers of history present in any performance that Gavin, I think you were articulating so beautifully. Like there is the layer of the first moment of its presentation if you're working on a play that has never been produced or that has been produced before, right? There is that first how it first engaged its audience, and now we have this blueprint for performance, but we're performing it to Seattle audiences and for our community in 2024. So what elements of that need to or should or want to change in some way? Which ones, to Sarah's point, we actually want to keep in so that it is kind of strange, but there's a productive friction there that's going to lead someone somewhere, as opposed to an unproductive friction that might close them off to the performance or cause harm or offend them in some way. So that's all part of it. And it's in then like institutionally, that's the conversation we have when we're figuring out what are the plays that we're going to be producing in the season at Seattle Rep, and what is our institutional, as like the repertory large regional theater in town, what is our relationship to classic plays and plays from the repertoire, which is in our name. So, a lot of that looks like textual, working with the director right now to go through each act and identify some stuff that ends up being like very kind of mundane, some small words here and there that maybe should change, to like much larger adaptation choices, which we have permission from the Thornton Wilder estate to do, that will also include Seattle Rep's public works community. And I don't want to get into a lot of detail about that right now because we don't have a ton of time, but we have a community of folks who are artists who put on productions at the Rep and who are part of our community. And so there'll be like large community portions, a large community ensemble that is going to perform portions of the play essentially, and that requires some level of adaptation. So I don't know, feel like I'm not quite sure if I answered your question, but it's an example of that kind of that question of, we have this play that was written this many years ago, what do we do now? And a lot of that ends up being very textual, and then eventually, I'm not quite there in my process yet, but eventually it'll become doing the research first around like Thornton Wilder and the context of its original production, and then some more specific research for where we are deciding to set it, which is a little different.
Yeah. Okay, so many places to go. I kind of want to stay on Wilder because I just read Tom Lake, and other folks have read Tom Lake. I'm having like a big, anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. I think where I want to pivot from here, and then I want to turn to our attendees and take a couple more of their questions, is to kind of follow that thread of community engagement, right? Both in sort of the formal sense of like, oh, I'm working with a partner elsewhere in the organization to work formally with this other thing, or I'm creating a lobby display or writing a program note and engaging with the audience in that way. But just in sort of an open-ended way, what is the dramaturg as public figure, or sort of like in relation to public, in relation to audience? I guess I should say who is, what is the wrong, but you know what I mean.
We're on lots of panels. No.
Yeah. I will say, like, Sara was sharing some of like because it's kind of a hard, it's as you have seen from the last 46 minutes, a complicated thing to describe, that oftentimes there's like metaphors that are used, or like, so we've shared some of those. And one that I've heard before for the dramaturg is like first audience, that kind of connected to that conversation we've had about questions, that oftentimes I will try to put myself in the the literal seat sometimes of someone who's coming to the Rep to see a show, and like what is the experience that we're we're sharing, and are all of the artistic choices that we're making, as far as we can tell, are those actually going to be communicating that story? So that's like one element of it, which is like literally someone who kind of everyone has their ear and their eyes out for that, but someone who can kind of have the luxury of paying a lot of attention to that is one way.
Yeah, I'm currently the production dramaturg for the upcoming production of Spring Awakening at the Fifth Avenue Theater. And I think that to take what we were just saying one step further is like, not only is there a responsibility to bring that story, which was written in 1891, like to present day, but a lot of what I'm working on is not only just like a lobby display, but actual resources that pertain to the content and nature of the show. And I think that the creative team on that production feels a deep responsibility to not overlook the content of that play and musical rather, and to say like, yes, we're going to give you like some major bops of like alternative rock music, but we're also going to be putting suicidal ideation on stage, and we're going to be doing it with actors embodying people under the age of 18. So like, we're going to leave you with some resources about like the importance of consent and mental health clinics for youth. And like, really, I think that theater, we hope that we're putting stories on stage that then connect to human beings, but I think newly are understanding that like, once we put those feelings or thoughts into people's bodies and spaces, that we then have to help them traverse the thing that we did if it worked. And so I think a public facing like act of service for a dramaturg is to be like, how can I help you take what you saw and like apply it to your everyday life? And that happens in like a lot of different ways, not only just like from a place of safety, but also from a place of philosophy, to bring it back to the chat too.
Yeah, that's and to just build that one step further, and then I can toss it back to you, Sarah. Because this is where the role of the dramaturg can get really, really hazy again, right? Because like, what is our role as theater makers, not just dramaturgs? What is it in service to the community and to the audience, right? And like, and not just that, but what does that service to community do to make the show better? Right. Yeah. And like, how far can we push that? There was a massive movement in like the 2012s, 2010s that was like, oh, what we do is like, we bring everybody into the theater and we give them all these resources and we build it out, you know, and we connect with communities that way. And it feels like since then it's kind of been like, no, we're going to community and we're building this thing. And like, there's so many different models and ways. And I think that theater making can be volunteering with your cast, theater, you know, and learning that way, you know, and bringing that back in. It can be providing services to community, it can be giving away free tickets and having these conversations along the way. And I think, you know, as theater continues to really circle around, I was going to say circle the drain. Oh my God. Circle around what we are at our heart. And it's the communities that we engage with, right? And how we engage with them. And that work is dramaturgical. Tossing back to you, Sarah.
Oh, I'll just pick up on your Freudian slip around circle of the because I would say that the figure of the dramaturg, one of our big roles, and it's often dramaturgs who are the biggest advocates and in public facing work, very strong advocates for the civic role of dramaturgy, civic role of theater, period, and the necessity of theater to a vital civic and municipal or nation life, right? And it's not that artistic directors and actors and designers don't believe those things or want to do that too, but it is often dramaturgs who are positioned to do it. And I would say that one of my goals for my term as LMDA president is to get us really, really galvanizing our work around how we rebuild arts institutions and audience engagements and the civic presence of performance in the world we're in after the last 5 years. Like that, I think dramaturgs are like the key to that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to just say we've got 9 minutes left in the session, and there's 2 really great questions in the chat. So I'm going to invite everyone to do their best to be succinct, even though they're kind of meaty questions. And then the last thing what I want to close out with is I just want to let each of the panelists do a quick plug for one thing that they are working on or want folks to see or a way to engage, which will dovetail nicely off David's question. So first, I want to dig in briefly. Peter has a question about historical lenses. And Sara graciously put actually a really succinct and wonderful answer in the chat, but I think it's worth talking about aloud as well. So talk to me a little bit about when you're reading history for work, or when you're doing dramaturgical work in general, what are some of the schools of thought you're engaging in, whether that's an ism or an ist or something like that? I think we all, maybe this is a safe thing to assume everyone thinks, but we know that history is both written and read with a political posture of some kind. And so that is, of course, part of our work too. Curious, and maybe not politics like sort of electoral politics, but just a perspective on a philosophy. Talk to me about that. How does that show up in your work and in your thinking? Huge question for the last 5 minutes.
I'm waiting because I've said so much. You all go.
I can put people on the spot. I know a bunch of your work.
Okay, I'm just also going to speak the name Hayden White, right? Like we know historiography also goes through different interpretive phases or schools, right? So I mean, I think about Hayden White all the time. I guess is what I'll say.
Maybe just to ground it in a production experience, I think maybe it's whether it's going back to an adaptation or staging an older play or a new play. Like, does anyone have an example of a time that you're like, this is the perspective, this is the story that we're trying to tell, or this is where we're meeting an audience on a certain expectation that relates to a way of maybe reading a moment or rereading a moment in history?
Yeah, that's helpful. Because I really appreciate it. It's very abstract, and I love to get into some abstract thinking. So I was like, okay, what am I? That just made me think of a production that we did at Seattle Rep that I worked on of Little Women. And it's, I will try to be succinct about this, but it was, I think the question there was, I ended up reading a lot of what I guess you could say is like queer scholarship, feminist scholarship around the life of Louisa May Alcott, and the portrayal specifically of gender and sexuality and trans identity in Little Women, and then also biographies of Louisa May Alcott written, I guess, from various different schools of history that were all talking about her relationship to gender, as that applied to a adaptation of Little Women that was taking an adaptation that didn't come down one way or the other on the character of Jo, but in a production that was very clearly deciding that Jo in our production was played by a trans actor and was wanting to embody that character with that reality. So in that way, it was okay, if this is what our goal is with this story, what are the kind of schools of history, of biography that we can turn to kind of understand how we can make these choices in a way that is not making any assumptions about this person. First of all, a fictional character, but also Louisa May Alcott herself, who we only have what she's written, right? So I don't know if that kind of answers the question in terms of where do you turn, like, for those resources, if you're not looking at like a primary source. Found myself for that production really looking towards queer histories of the United States, also more broadly, and specifically around the Civil War era.
Yep. Great. Any other specific case studies on that? Oh yeah, Gavin, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't going to give you a specific case study, but I was gonna answer it in a slightly different way, which I know that Erin and I can both agree on, and which is looking at other disciplines for ways of analyzing and creating structure and approaching work. I think that as theater makers, we often are taught to, even though it's a multidisciplinary field, but we are kind of taught to pigeon ourselves in a literary point of view, which is really built around historical isms and around like stuff that comes from this really specific discipline and is very literary, when in reality, like a lot of the work that is happening today is born out of other disciplines, whether it is music or dance. A lot of theater today is built on the grounds of like the viewpoints, which comes out of dance, right? Comes out of modern dance. And that's how a lot of folks have learned to create new work, right? Or even thinking about like Fat Ham right now, which is a reinterpretation of Hamlet, which is at the Rep, which is a fantastic production. I'll just plug that for you.
Thanks.
And it's a really interesting kind of mixture of different disciplines into a really traditional Shakespearean format. And I think that's, you know, as we are rightfully in this like postmodernist kind of approach to it, you know, we are melding all these different disciplines. And the show that I'm going to work on at South Coast Rep next week is Keiko Green's You're Cordially Invited to the End of the World, which is framed as a giant drag show, right, that ends in a giant cabaret. And it's really great when you get to look at a piece that you're developing, whether it's something that you're adapting or developing anew, and be like, well, what if it's not in a 5-act structure, or what if it's not in a beginning, middle, end structure, and what if it is built like a concert? What if it's built like like a Crystal Pipe piece, right? As you were referencing Seasons Canon earlier, Sarah. You know, and what if we take some of these things? And dramaturgy is very much so built in the bones of opera and dance also, and I think it's really exciting to return to those ideas and those roots and to embrace them and see what we can do and what kind of new forms we can build.
Oh man, okay, so we could do 6 more sessions of this because I asked about 6 of the 24 questions. They're prepared, I was ready. It's a profession of questioning, you know, what can I say? Thank you all so much for your wonderful questions in the chat and for your time and attention. It's really just such a wonderful opportunity for us to engage with each other and to get a chance to speak with historians such as yourselves and folks with an interest in history. As I said, I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk about something that they're working on, or something they've seen recently that they love. Seattle area is great since we're speaking to the Pacific Northwest Historians Guild, but I'll take whatever you want to share. And then all of us are available. We are very findable on the internet if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing. Read things we've written, see shows that we've been a part of. Please give us a Google and you'll find everyone. And so yeah, we'll just go back in the order we did introductions. I don't know if I remember it, but Erin, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, mine's easy. Just come see Spring Awakening at the Fifth Avenue Theater and see if we did a good job of making it feel like now and not making it surface level. I think it's going to be a really unique production, but I'm supposed to think that. So I leave it up to you guys to be the judges.
Amazing. Great. Paul, what about you?
I am gonna Gavin, thank you for the free plug for Fat Ham, which is running at Seattle Rep. I'm gonna be greedy and then also plug another thing which I'm not associated with but I'm really excited about, which is a new works festival. So you can come. We've talked a lot about plays that were written in the 40s, but there's also new work happening all the time that then becomes part of the canon. So there's an organization called Shattered Glass Project in Seattle, and they have a new works festival happening with selections of three to four new plays written by Seattle playwrights who are kind of emerging onto the scene. And it was part of a larger cohort of playwrights and dramaturgs who are kind of learning about new work. So very exciting to see that kind of work happening in Seattle. So I encourage you to also go see the other end of the spectrum, something brand new.
Excellent. Great. Sara.
Right now, my department is for the first time doing a co-production with a local Tacoma theater company and Pathos Theater, and we're doing Jackie Louise Drury's play Fairview, opening at the beginning of June, so 2 weekends in June, in the round in our theater on campus. And it's her least historical play, but it is still still really important and beautiful mountain, and the culmination of about 4 years work that started in May of 2020 and around the execution of George Floyd, as we were asking ourselves, how can we do the work that we need to do on a primarily white campus for our world? And so we're finding ways. If I could also just quickly plug that my book came out at the end of December. It's called Playwriting, Dramaturgy in Space, and that part of its premise is exactly what Gavin was talking about, which is that playwrights now are influenced by all of the same innovations and experiments. They've assimilated all of the things that have been part of all art form experiments for the last century, and their writing and the way that their texts work or their processes work are of a piece with it. There's no longer a like literary playwriting and something else. It's all this whole beautiful thing that I think is very spatial in its dramaturgy.
Oh, it's so hard to know what to plug. I hate this. I'll say the easiest part is go follow the Seagull Project on all socials. We're gonna announce our next project really soon. It'll be another adaptation of a play, and so that's gonna be something that will involve all of these conversations that we're having. And just like, yeah, Google me and then follow all the things that you see my name next to. Thank you. No, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for caring about what we do. It means a lot.
Sara,
All right.
anything else? Or are you passing it back?
I'm really grateful. This was such a blast. And David, I wanted to give you a quick shout out again. David originally reached out to me to have me come talk for an hour, and while I certainly could, this is just so much better. So thank you, friends, colleagues, for coming to be the brain trust on this. And David, thanks for the invitation and letting me bring four plus ones.
Yeah, thank you, Sara and Gavin and Erin and Paul. This was more than I expected. It was great. I really appreciate your thoughts, your observations. I love the idea of ignite the imagination, which I think, that's what we're trying to do as historians, is how do we help people understand that context? And as you say, place them in the production, not only in time, but in mental space too. So I really appreciate getting your insights, and look forward to, I'm going to see Romeo and Juliet next week. I'm very excited. Yay, for about the millionth time, but how could you not want to see that for the millionth time? So I will now turn it to Jim, my president.
Okay, and geez, David, you think you're excited. This whole panel is beneficial to my marriage, because every time I go to a play, I turn to my wife and I say, "My God, I'm just amazed what the set designers do. I just don't understand how they come up with that." Now I'll be able to say, I think there was a very good dramaturg involved in this play. So now I'll bore her with that, but it'll take a while. But many thanks. I think it was time well spent. We will sign off in just a moment, but I do want to remind people that May 23rd is our next meeting, and it is the annual meeting, but that's not a big deal. It's going to be very short, but there's going to be a research roundtable, and people are invited to participate in that, and more information will be coming. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.